What's up and what's happening, TPE family? We're back with another episode of the Pivot Experience Podcast. Our aim and goal with the Pivot Experience Podcast is to help leaders get better each and every week. On this episode, it's a special one because this is actually going to be a replay from our most recent Lead Better. The TPE Lead Better is a free virtual session where we like to bring in guests and to also discuss critical leadership concepts that we will believe that help you pivot into your next. On this particular Lead Better, we have Chick-fil-A operator Eric Sienko from the Houston area. I've had the honor and pleasure of knowing Eric for a few years now, and he gave us the opportunity to be able to share his story on our platform. And so hope you guys enjoy this. If you are a leader, entrepreneur, wanting to get into development and progression of your career, this is a very good Lead Better to listen to as Eric dives into his story and his experiences from becoming a restaurant leader to becoming an operator. So enjoy the episode, guys. I'm sure you will.
Take this, my love, mine.
Move forward. And on this Lead Better, operator Eric Sienko, that is now in the Houston area, has graciously agreed to be a part of this journey. I definitely know Eric. I had the opportunity of meeting Eric in Orange, and we had the chance to just learn and grow. I learned a lot from him. I've heard a lot of his story, and I can't wait for him to share his story with you all. But before we do that, I want to know, where are you from? If you would do me a favor, go to your chat function and put into the chat where you are attending this meeting from. We definitely want to know where you guys are from. I know we're not just Texas here. We've got some people from all over the country here in this call so far. So definitely put that in the chat. My name is Alex Seal, and I am the creator of TPE. I don't like to, own that, because I work with a lot of great people that we are collaboratively putting this business together. I've had over 20 years with the world's most caring company, Chick-fil-A. Giovanna is also a coach here. She has over 20 years worth of experience with Chick-fil-A. She's a leadership coach with us. Ashley Allison, she has over 7 years of Chick-fil-A experience, and she is a leadership coach. And she's really the one of the best administrative leaders I've probably had the opportunity to work with. She really keeps all the loose ends together, and she keeps us focused on the things that we need to do here at the TPE, and in the buckets that other hats that she wears. Neff is our bilingual leadership coach. So for those of you out there who have people who are ESL inside of your organization, or they speak Spanish, Neff is our go-to when it comes down to all things Spanish leadership coaching. And so again, this event is all about helping you guys hear from the perspective of someone who was a restaurant leader, transition from being a restaurant leader to getting into Chick-fil-A's leadership development program, and is now an operator. And to add to that, not only is he an operator, but he got one opportunity and then was granted another opportunity to move. So the perspective here that I believe that Eric Sienko brings to the table is really rich. And so we're going to talk through those three buckets. If you guys have any questions or anything that you would like Eric to speak into, use the chat function. One of the coaches will be monitoring the chat, taking those questions in, and toward the end of this presentation, or this conversation rather, we'll have an opportunity for either Ashley or Neff to ask Eric those questions, and we'll go, ask Eric those questions, and then we'll move forward from there. So Eric, how are you doing this evening, sir?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on here. It's really awesome that you do this for people, so I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thank you. So before we get into like the nitty gritty of any questions that we have here, just kind of, can you tell the people who you are, where you're from, what you're passionate about?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm originally from Houston, Texas. Started with Chick-fil-A when I was 14. So now that was about 18 years ago. When I started, it was terrible. I always joke that I would have fired myself. Just being a 14-year-old, messing up orders, going slow, never would have hung in Beaumont with you guys. That's for sure. Been too slow. But overall stuck with it, constantly tried to grow and get better. So over time, I really fell in love with Chick-fil-A. Just throughout my life, Chick-fil-A has been a very consistent thing for me. So my mom passed away when I was 18, and my parents had split when I was 14 and didn't have contact with my dad. So around 18, Chick-fil-A became like truly a second family for me. So it's one of the things that really drew me to Chick-fil-A. Then during that time, I also had to put myself through college, so paid for my own schooling while working full time. Then applied for LDP. Was fortunate to get in when I was about 21, 22. That feels like forever ago now. Or I'm sorry, no, that's a lie. 23. Which is great. Traveled for about 3 years. So back whenever I was in, it was a 2-year program, and that was supposed to be it. But just the way sometimes it works out, you get to stay in a little bit longer. And I think they've adjusted the program now to kind of account for it not being a hard set time, which is nice. And so after about 3 years, I was selected to go out into Orange, which was about 2 hours away from Houston, which was a great opportunity. I was excited. It was a grand opening restaurant, 2 hours from where I grew up. Honestly, in Chick-fil-A world, it doesn't really get much better than that. Whenever I went into LDP, I thought I wasn't even going to get back to Texas. And so I was really grateful for that. Then enjoyed my time in Orange, grand opened that restaurant, and was like, hey, I'm pretty happy here. I knew eventually I wanted to get back to Houston, but was like, I'm not doing a whole grand opening again unless it's somewhere I'm going to stay forever. Then after about 2.5 years of being in Orange, a restaurant 10 minutes from where I grew up actually activated. And so I had to apply for that. And this is now going to be my forever restaurant. We opened about 8 or 9 months ago now. So it was in November. And so did second grand opening, never moving again is the plan. Staying here, which is nice. Finally putting down some roots and stuff like that. So very excited.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that snapshot into your life. I want to know if you would, I want to talk about your time in the restaurant, because I believe that time is really important as you're building your skills, learning the business, learning how to lead. What are some of the challenges you faced in the restaurant as you were trying to get yourself prepared for Leadership Development Program, LDP?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really is multiple levels. So obviously, like, I think you have to be operationally proficient is kind of like the very baseline. I'm very much, as an operator, an operations guy. I think it all goes back to helping the customer. And so I would say level one's kind of like, hey, you have to know all areas of the business. You don't have to be the best at them, but you have to understand them. You have to understand the work that goes in there. And it's the same thing I require of my leaders. So literally, like, if we have a director coming up, no matter what they want to do in the restaurant, if they're going to get to that director level, they have to know both front and back. I was primarily front of house, and I think that was almost a disservice by the time I got into LDP. So I didn't do this, but I would encourage you, if you're front, spend some time in the back, even if it's volunteering just to learn it. If you're back, spend some time in the front. It gives you a more holistic view of the restaurant, and it allows you to make much better decisions. So I did not do that, but that's some advice. The other thing I would say in the restaurant that's very important is just pretend it's yours. So with your operator's permission, obviously, try things and try to make the restaurant better. Prioritize the restaurant over yourself. And I believe that leads you to make decisions that will help your candidacy regardless. I always tell people who I've coached about getting into LDP is do a lot, because then you have a lot to talk about. You can learn to talk about it. I think people focus on interviewing skills more than they do on actual content. But I think you can learn interview skills in about a month. You can't create that much content over time in a month. And you do that by doing and by failing. And that's why I say talk to your operator, because every operator is a little different. I give my leaders a ton of freedom. I understand not every operator is that way, though. So I'd encourage you to talk to them, but then just try stuff to make the restaurant better. And if you treat it like it's your own, you're more than likely not going to do anything too bad.
Excellent.
I think too, Eric, just to kind of like play off of that, but like try stuff, but also document it. A lot of LDP candidates that I work with, they're like, okay, so when we're talking about business acumen or restaurant results, they're like, I know I've created results, but I can't really like pinpoint what they are. And so I think one thing that I've encouraged anybody that wants to go into LDP or become an operator that's currently working in the restaurant is have some form of documentation where you're just writing down. It can even just be thoughts, little tidbits, a note that you put on your phone that's like, hey, this is like an area I'm working on. Here's where we're at. Here's where we want to go. Here's 3 things I did. This is the result. Like basic, doesn't have to be crazy. But anybody on this call who wants to get into LDP, you can't just try things and forget about them and move on. Like you actually have to be kind of documenting what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's good because I remember preparing for interviews and it's like 3 years ago, I don't remember what I did. And so having a log of that stuff is very good. As well as sometimes you'll pull one lever and expect something to happen and something different happens. And you're like, hang on a second, why did this change over here? So, you might do something that actually objectively makes you faster, but your customers might say you're slower. So you might see your speed of service go down, but your CEM, speed of service, decreases as well. So usually there's cause and effect there.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Giovanna, for that comment as well. I actually, and I'm going to pull from just what I know of you, Eric. Can you speak into? One of the times we had the chance to meet in your restaurant in Orange, you were talking about this very thing that Giovanna's talking about in terms of documenting. Can you speak into I remember you talking about dinner sales and where dinner sales were before you start leading them versus, you might not remember this. I'm sure you do.
I do.
Though. Can you, I guess, speak into that example just for the people who are here, just to kind of give them an idea of what does documenting look like? And more importantly, what does it sound like to communicate it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am not the best documenter, so don't feel bad if that's you, but it is important. And I think it makes it a lot easier. You can also retroactively do it. So that's what I tend to do a lot is I'll do stuff and I'll look and be like, hey, 2 months ago, this is what it was, and now it's this. So not all of us are as organized as maybe Giovanna is, which is okay. But I do think that is a very important piece. And so what Alex is referring to is when I talk about treating the restaurant like your own. When I was a leader in the restaurant, I actually closed 6 nights a week and owned the nighttime part, which nobody enjoys doing, but I will say that is where some of my biggest growth came from as a leader, because you are just more on your own. I would say a lot of times the support's there during the day, the longer term people are there. And so I viewed it more as a challenge, and of course didn't enjoy every day of it. I'm not going to pretend I did. However, being able to have that freedom allowed me to try things, treat the restaurant like my own. And what happened is we started off, and I don't remember the exact numbers, so my apologies, but I do remember, I think whenever I started there, we were doing about 1.5-ish million in sales just from 5 to close. And so when you talk about tracking, I wanted to track what I actually influenced. So I started tracking the sales and CEMs and different stuff specifically for 5 to close. And at first I was running around trying to do everything, wasn't getting any results. And a few months in, I was like, okay, this just is absolutely not working. No CEMs were going up, sales weren't going up, nothing was really changing. And so I had to kind of shift from trying to do everything to really start building up people and relying on them. And so I kind of made that shift. That was probably when I was 18 or 19. And the first month, nothing was different. But then over time, so kind of going back to Giovanna's point of tracking, I started to notice our CEMs going up, sales started increasing. And over the course of, I believe it was 3 years, we went from 1.5 million to 3 million from just 5 to close, just that day part. And then once I kind of saw that number, I started thinking man, there's some restaurants. This was back in 2014, 2015. So there was some restaurants that were still doing just 3 million, freestanding restaurants. And that was actually close to the average. So that kind of changed my thinking on hey, if I had a $3 million restaurant, I would do an RQA every day. So maybe I should do one every 5 to close because we're helping that many customers. So yeah, long story short, grew sales about 100% over 3 years. We went from underperforming at night to performing well and executing operational excellence back at the time. Now it's the create raving fans or I'm lost my train of thought. The winning hearts every day. Same kind of idea though, focusing on the basics.
Yeah, and so I guess I want to kind of put a bow on this portion of the conversation because again, this is reflecting on your time in the restaurant. And so if I'm hearing you right, try to find something that you can own and make it your own. Right. Obviously, you got to understand what your leadership structure is. If you have a director of operations over you or a GM or your operator, because I love your story in particular. I'm kind of put this in here because you were able to come out of your restaurant not from the top position in the restaurant. And I think a lot of people who are looking to go to LDP feel like they have to be at that top position in the restaurant in order to get into the program. You found a sweet spot where the lane was clear, nighttime. Of course, none of us, particularly who have been here for a long time, don't want to close every night. You took on the challenge of doing that, and ultimately you're living out the fruit of that. Now, of course, you've done some other things in between that point into where you are now, but it all started with your focus and taking ownership in that component. So I love that. So I guess I would like to try to transition us into LDP. So you got that Chick-fil-A's nighttime sales up to $3 million. What was the mindset? What was the thinking when you started to approach the application process, then going through the interview process, and then ultimately getting accepted? What was that train of thought there?
Yeah, for sure. And I do want to touch base. You said something actually very important is know what part you own and what part you don't own. So if you're not at the top, like you can't take credit for some stuff. And so don't try to. And I think it's just as mature and just as important to know what pieces you can affect, what pieces you partially affect, and what pieces you just don't affect. So sorry, you kind of touched on that a little bit. I think that's extremely important, especially for interviewing, because they know, like ultimately at my restaurant now, the operator is responsible for everything, but my team does do specific things that they have directly impacted themselves. So, all right, now on to your actual question. So I would say going through the interview process was stressful, which is probably the same for everybody. I don't think I am a very good interviewer, definitely not at that time. And so I had fortunately done a lot of stuff in my restaurant, but I was not good at articulating it. I went and met with an LDP consultant prior. This was probably a year or two prior to applying for LDP, to do a mock interview with him. And I remember it going just terribly. So he asked me a question. I mean, it was like not a hard question. It was something like, tell me about a time you and your operator disagreed. And I just butchered it. Like it was so bad. I was all over the place. I was over here. And I had thoughts in my head, but I couldn't articulate them. And so he couldn't get to know me or really what my answer was to that question. And some of it was nerves and some of it was just practice. And those kind of go hand in hand a little bit. And so it was really funny because he literally looked at me. His name's Bryant Ford. He's in like selection now, but he's a really good guy. And he just looked at me. He's like, hey, so how do you think you did? And I was like, honestly, pretty terrible. And he just started laughing. He was like, okay, like, why do you think that? And I was honest with him. And so I think it's important to know like honesty can be a good thing in those situations. And starting at the very bottom is probably where I was. So Chick-fil-A was my first job, never really had to do a real interview. It was like, hey, you smiled, cool, like you got the job. So I spent a lot of time, I actually tracked my stuff like Giovanna was talking about. So I knew which results I wanted to talk about and which points were like my home run stories, because we all have them. So that increasing sales 100% was a home run story. So I wanted to work that into the interview at some point. The practicing, I think, is important because you learn what to cut out and what to include. Anytime you first talk about something, you're going to include some stuff that's just kind of boring and you kind of lose people's attention. or you're going to forget to include some stuff that's really important and makes the story really good. And so I think that's the value in practicing, not memorizing exactly word for word what you want to say. I think that's when you kind of get into that rehearsed and you're just trying to memorize a script, and that's not good. But you want to be able to calm your nerves. You want to be able to rest on like, hey, I've done this before. I know what points I need to hit. It's going to be okay. And I think that's what practice helps. And I went and interviewed with a bunch of different people that I did not know. Because I think it's different when you know somebody. So like people will pick like, oh, I know my fellow manager. Let me interview with them. But they already know you. They know your quirks. They might already know the story. And so they can fill in the gaps themselves by going to talk to a complete stranger. And I didn't do this, but I encourage like not even Chick-fil-A related. Go talk to them, because then you have to be able to explain some of the stuff we take for granted, right? Like you walking into the restaurant, you're like, oh, a Henny. And they're like, what's a Henny? And you're like, okay, the fryers. You learn to tell stories in a different way that is really more easily received by a wider group of people.
Excellent.
Well, and Eric, on that note too, sorry, Alex.
We're good.
I'm working with somebody right now that's going through the process, and I constantly tell him, don't pigeonhole yourself in a spot where you're talking about something you don't want to talk about. Because I think in interviewing, like, focus on the things that you know really well, and don't mention something that then they can ask you 10 questions about that you're like, man, I'm not in HR. I don't know the hiring process. I don't know. So don't leave things so open-ended that they can ask you questions about things that you don't want to have to answer to. And so I think knowing those key stories and things that you know really well, and the highlights of like who you are as a leader and how you lead others, is what is going to help you not put yourself in those situations. Because when you focus on those wins too, the things that I've seen come out of conversations with people trying to get into LDP is their passion comes out. And then the interviewer gets more excited on the other end to just talk to them about those things and not kind of like take you down a road that you don't want to go down.
Right. Yeah, I think that is important. And I think that's also a part of like knowing what you did do versus what you didn't. When you know what you did do, it's perfectly okay to be like, hey, like, I actually really wasn't involved in that, but I'll tell you the story if you want me to. And I think that's just important to know. And to your point, there's also like, as you practice interviewing, so if you want to go specifically into interviews, if you don't want to talk about something, don't go near it. Like, not with 100-foot pole. Like, if you don't want to talk about your time in New York, don't even say you've been to New York. Like, just avoid that. I know this is recorded. This will probably get back to Chick-fil-A. So if I'm not an operator after that, just remember my sacrifice. But the other piece of that is, I would say, if you do want to talk about something, and for example, like Alex kind of alluded to my story before, which prompted me to talk about it. But in the interview, how I approached that was like, yeah, I took over nighttime. I grew sales by 100% from 5 to close over the course of 3 years. And I also did these other things. The natural follow-up question is, how on earth did you grow sales 100% in 3 years? Right? Like, and so I think that's an important part of like, when you do talk, they're going to ask you about the interesting things. Or if you make a bold statement like that, they will ask you about it, because they want to know, how did you do it? Did you do it on purpose? Was it just you happened to grow because of, a bunch of stuff is built by you? Like, or did you actually do things that grew sales and made customers come back?
Well, and in those situations, Eric, I always say have a good bullet pointed 3 to 5. So like, if you're talking about how you grew sales from 5 to close to 3 million, you better have 3 to 5 like bullet points underneath those to help you communicate that well. But that's all part of communication. And that's where it's like what you said, like talking to people outside of Chick-fil-A, interviewing with people that you don't know, like that's going to be what helps you become a better communicator. And I think a lot of these young individuals trying to get into LDP, specifically because like their end of their high school career was during COVID. And I will also say, due to cell phones, like communication, the art of communication is kind of a lost art, because you can text somebody and you don't have to say anything. Like literally it's like putting something out there. And so in these interviews, like what Chick-fil-A wants to see is that you can communicate, because you're communicating to your team every day. You're having to communicate back to the support center. What you're putting out there gets communicated to the guests. Like, you're the representation of the brand for your restaurant. And so they want to know that you can communicate. So if you can't communicate and communication is a problem, that's where you need to start, is like, okay, I've got some results. I know I can grow people. I can lead people. I know I can lead an area of the business, but I can't communicate it. Well, you might want to like take a standstill for a minute and not apply, at least for, 3 months, so that you can really work on that communication piece.
Yeah. No, I mean, that absolutely is true. My job now as an operator is probably like 90% communication. Like, it's just that valuable. Half the time it's sitting down with somebody, but even in leadership development stuff, you have to communicate down to the person you're talking to. And so really the operator should be the best communicator in the restaurant. So if you're down here and that's just the reality, you're going to really have a bad restaurant, because all your team will be down here or lower. If y'all have never heard, it's the law of the lid. Essentially, like, I have to keep growing for my restaurant to keep growing, because a leader can never be better than me I would say, at certain things. And I think communication is one of those things. Otherwise, they will go work somewhere else, or they would essentially take my job. And so most of the times they go work somewhere else, right? And so I think that's something that's important, and like, not just for interviews. It's important just for your daily job.
Absolutely. So we've had some people come in since we've been going on this question. Welcome you guys in. If you guys have any questions during the time in which we're going through this, please use the chat function. We will ask Eric those questions towards the end of this conversation. So I wanted to make sure we get a point of order there. And so what it sounds like to me, Eric, that practice and practice and practice is very, very, very important to the interview process, particularly when you're talking about the level of opportunity that Chick-fil-A is. I think a lot of people think they can just put the application in and then go wing it for an interview, but this is a thorough process, because Chick-fil-A is entrusting a lot of capital, a lot of brand equity into each of these individuals. So, but those of you who are out there considering the opportunity of going into leadership development, the LDP program, get with somebody and at a minimum have them interview you. A lot of times there's people who are in the program currently that you can find on LinkedIn, or you can find anywhere that will just facilitate that interview. And if you're really serious, I would suggest you get a coach, and we'll have more on that toward the back end of this conversation, the end of this session. But the next question I have for you, Eric, I guess this is a quick one. From application to acceptance, what was that window? Like, how long did it take from you to put that application in to when you got accepted?
So I had a very weird journey, I would say, for operator as well. But mine was like 2.5 weeks. Well, application was like a month, but interview to on the road was about 1.5 weeks. So mine was weird. I always joke that they had to fill the class because our class was super small. And so they didn't want to cancel it. And so that's how I snuck into LDP. Might be true, might not be. I don't know. I'm here, so it's harder to get rid of me now. But yeah, mine was about like a month total from that application going in.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, for the rest of you guys who are interested in this opportunity, that is not going to be the case. Like, highly likely that's not going to be the case. I think the individual that Giovanna's working with right now, I don't know, we might be on month 3 or 4 from application to halfway through interviews. So it's not that fast. So just,
I would say that's more normal. Yeah.
4 to 6 months. They're pretty much saying 4 to 6 months now, like from initial submission of interest to getting in a class, which then that can be even a couple of months depending on when you get told yes, and then the class starts. So, but I have an operator friend too as well that like theirs was like 6 weeks, and so it's not the typical anymore. I'd say 4 to 6 months now, and it's like normally 2 to 3 weeks in between interviews is what I'm seeing.
I would say, like, as an operator, Chick-fil-A moves more slowly. I think I got in right when they transitioned into LDP from GOS to IM. So there's obviously like, just like we have different business needs, like we've all hired someone who normally starts like a week and a half, and there's been times where you're like, hey, you want to start in 2 days? Like, and so there's different seasons to every business. And that goes for Chick-fil-A as well. I would say yes, more commonly, 4 to 6 months is what I have heard as well. And also, like as an operator, it took like 2 years. So there's just different times and different business environments as well.
And so I mean, we spend a lot of time, I guess, on the you getting into LDP. And I know I really want to spend some time around your experience as an operator. But before we go there, can you talk about maybe 2 successes that you've had in LDP, and then 2 challenges that you experienced during LDP that you feel like has shaped your journey so far?
Yeah. I mean, I'm of the mindset all my greatest successes have honestly come from my biggest challenges. And so like even whenever I interviewed with Chick-fil-A, like I was pretty honest of like, hey, here were some like walls that I hit, and then eventually I overcame those walls. I'm not afraid to share those things. Obviously, like I'm not going to leave it at like, oh, I just failed at this and that's it. But I think there is a point to saying like growth is not just straight up. Like growth comes from like dropping, trying things, not working, trying something different, that's still not working, trying something different, it finally works and it finally clicks, right? So I would say those are almost the same questions, because whenever I went to interview, all my challenges essentially turned into successes. So if you want something that's like just hard about it, like life on the road sucks. It's you're living out of hotels, you are in a different place at the whim of whatever the Chick-fil-A needs. So I'd say that's like a hard thing, and that's like a challenge to it. You guys tend to see like as a GOS, like we'd post pictures on Instagram and like, oh, I'd go do this. I'd get to go do like maybe one cool thing every 8 weeks. And that's usually the stuff like we'd post on like social media, right? And so you're like, oh, wow, they got to go to Massachusetts. They got to go to downtown Boston. And it was like, that was one Sunday of 2 months of work. And so I would say the lifestyle is just tough and hard. And so it's also lonely, but with that, you kind of get to know yourself because you're removed from all really external environment, family, friends, essentially, and put on your own. So you get to learn a lot about yourself. So one of my biggest successes though was like I took over really bad restaurants on 2 separate occasions where the operator was essentially terminated. Some retired, but it was basically terminations. One of them was in downtown Washington, D.C., so it was about a quarter mile from the murder capital in the world. And so it was a very tough environment. And as someone from Texas, like way tougher than most of the areas in the Houston area. I'll just put it that way. And so I think that one was extremely challenging because the type of leader I had to be was very militaristic, and that's not what I enjoy doing. And so I think it made me more grateful though for like how I get to be now and how I get to just like invest in people, help them grow. Whereas that was essentially like, how do I get the bare minimum out of everybody? And so I think what that did and why I call this a success is as I learned to balance those 2 things, I really just learned that like, hey, discipline, it essentially removes behaviors, and then encouragement and rewards like improves behaviors. And so what I mean by that is like, I'm not going to like encourage you to be on time for a shift. I am going to discipline you to remove you from being late. However, if I want you to go like a little faster, if I want to see a little bit of better customer service, I'm more than likely going to encourage you to do those things. And so I think being in that environment was really good for being able to balance those 2 things and knowing like, hey, pretty much I was focused only on the discipline thing. And the reality is like encouragement did not work nearly as well in that environment without the discipline. And so you have to have both. And I had to like, I fired people in LDP. Like I had to really lean into that discipline side to create that baseline before I could then go and encourage and start to build people.
Yeah, so I recently had a conversation with someone that's currently in LDP, and it kind of echoed exactly what you're saying. I feel like the different stops that you make, whether it's from a GOS standpoint or if you're IMing in a restaurant, the challenges are different. You know, a lot of us, if you're working in a restaurant currently on the line, you know the culture of your restaurant. You were likely hired in as a team member, and you had the opportunity to mature into leadership, and you know what that is. Well, during the 30 months that you're in LDP, you might have 4 different assignments, and those 4 different assignments the cultures of those 4 different assignments might be totally different. So I've heard that the process really stretches your leadership because, to your point, you had to be more militant in one area. You might have to be more encouraging in another area. You might walk into a great situation where all the cultural pieces are together and you don't necessarily have to exercise those things. And so I think what I'm hearing from you is a high level of flexibility and agility when you're going through the process. You know, when you walk into the situation of LDP, you don't know what's going to get thrown at you in terms of, you know, the condition of the store. You know, when you walk in, are you looking to drive profitability? Are you looking to drive hospitality? And you have to do that very quickly. You know, it's different. You know, being an operator, you're thinking long term, whereas you might be at one place for 2 to 3 months, and you're responsible for turning that around in that period of time. So thank you so much for that. So let's talk a little bit about your transition from LDP to operator, and I guess specifically, what did it look like when you got told, hey, we think you're ready, put your application in? What was that moment like, and what was that experience?
You're saying for interviewing for operator?
Yeah.
So, I mean, we just got an email. I don't know if it's different now. We just got like a link sent to us and got to fill out the application. And so then you just don't hear anything. It's kind of the gist of it is like, it's very radio silence until they want to talk to you. So I would say I think it was 4 or 5 focus interviews. So I had a lot of focus interviews before I landed on my restaurant. And I mean, I'm telling you, like, you'd go from 3 months to not hearing anything to like, hey, we want to interview you. Hey, we're going to fly you out here in a week. And then it's like, then radio silence again. And it's like, hey, either yes or no, you got it. And then radio silence. And then until something else activates, you apply for it and they want to interview you. I do know their communication has gotten a little better on like, hey, we're not interested in interviewing you for this opportunity. We never got that whenever I did. So you're just kind of in suspense for a while. So I think that's a huge improvement. What I will say is it took me about 2 years. And I honestly think that ended up working out in my favor because I switched to the interim manager side on the second half. So I did an interview in that restaurant in Washington, D.C. that I was talking about earlier. That was a very tough environment. And I think this is one of the benefits of being an LDP versus applying outright. So I'll tell you a little story of why this is important. I think very important that helped my candidacy is I went to DC. I was the interim manager there. The selection guy came out to visit me to do my interview on site. So whenever I talked about like, hey, knowing what I did versus your operator earlier, I think being an interim manager gives you a bigger range of that. There's still certain things that'll tie your hands, but you have a much bigger range. And so you could say like 70% of the restaurant is me versus, you know, whenever I was working for my previous operators, probably like 10 to 20% of the restaurant. And so when he came out to interview me, like they went and visited the Chick-fil-A, they got to have the experience. Now, granted, it was in downtown DC, so it's going to be a little different for Texas, but that selection guy had been to that restaurant multiple times prior to me being the interim manager there. So not only was I able to talk about the things that I did, he was also able to see the differences there. And I think that's where like working hard through LDP really paid off for me. Not only did I gain a bunch of experience that I could talk about, but like genuinely like selection was able to see like, hey, I know what this restaurant looked like before he was here and I can see what it looks like now. And that doesn't happen in one day. Like you're not going to just fake and be like, hey, like I'll be nice today and like actually have good food today and actually like be friendly to each other today and like no physical fights today. Like that doesn't work. And so he like walked through the restaurant and it was like 2 minutes. And then he like already commented on like, oh yeah, no, I saw a difference. Like I saw you had someone outside. What were they doing? I was like, oh, they're just cleaning up like the grounds. Like it was a drive-through only. So I was like, this is our dining room. So we just clean up the entire neighborhood essentially. And the guy was like, oh man, that's like really good. Because last time I was here, there was tons of trash everywhere. And so I think that really helped my candidacy and like my work ethic and helped me in the application process, honestly. And I think that's a huge benefit to LDP is that you do get a little bit of exposure that's directly you potentially. I'm not gonna say that happens for everybody, but potentially.
Got it. So how many, I guess, was Orange your first offer?
So funny enough, I was supposed to get a mall in Dallas. I told you I'm a weird guy. I was supposed to get a great mall in Dallas, was excited for it. I was in the interview process for 2 years. And so I was during a time where they just changed the rules for multi and relocation to where pretty much everything was going to operators. And so eventually I was like, okay, well, I want to be an operator more than I care about like getting back to Houston. So I was going to go to this mall. And then about a week before my final interview, they called me and were like, hey, what do you think about Orange, Texas? And I'm like, I have a final interview for a mall in Dallas. I haven't looked at Orange, Texas, and thinking it was a test and all this stuff, because as you do when you're in the interview process. So they were like, hey, we really would want you for this location, but we want to know if you're interested in it. It'd be a grand opening freestander out in Orange. And I was like, would I have to, it's like, I have questions because one, I have a final for this mall. It's like, if I were to look into this, would I have to interview again? And then would I be competing against other candidates? And essentially they came back and said like, no, you wouldn't have to interview again. And we won't have any competing candidates if it's something you're interested in. You'd still have your final, you still have to pass your final, but we just change your final for that. And essentially like my question was like, hey, I have a bird in the hand. Is that worth two in the bushes over here? Because if I was going to go back into the interview process, like I probably would have turned it down had I had to compete against other people.
Yeah, well, fortunately for you, Orange is just booming enough to where there was nobody else that
I know. You
yeah.
just, hey man, you get good opportunities where people don't want to go. I'll tell you what.
Definitely. So I guess we got about another 9 minutes before we get into Q&A. So I guess can you just talk through the mindset that you had when you had the opportunity to do a grand opening? You know, for some of us on the line going through LDP, we may get a grand opening opportunity. We might be taking over in an existing restaurant. You were fortunate enough to be able to do the grand opening piece. What was that like for you as an operator? What were some of the standards that you were trying to put in place? And then what was the reality after the honeymoon phase was over?
Yeah. I mean, I think our ambitions are always bigger than what we can actually achieve. You know, I vividly remember being like, well, like I know operators normally like say it takes about a year to kind of get your restaurant like stable. And I was like, okay, I want to do it faster. I want to do it faster. Took me a year. Like just a month in, everybody quits. 6 months in, everybody quits. It's hard to get that momentum going. So that was one thing where like, I think, you know, we all just think we can do a little bit better. Maybe someone can. That's great for you. It took me about the average of a year. So that's one. And then the other thing is, I would say what did work is I was focused extremely on the basics. And so like, we were just trying to serve good food and somewhat quickly and pray the order was right. Like that was kind of our goal for the first 3 months. We also opened during COVID, so that added an entirely different dynamic that I was not technically prepared for. And I think that was a benefit of being an LDP and being able to be flexible. Is I opened the week COVID like shut down all the schools. Like that Monday, all the schools closed, and we opened that Thursday. It caused a lot of weird dynamics with trainers and all these different things. And so I think that having different experience, dealing with different things, being able to handle legal stuff from LDP really paid off in those moments. So that was great. I would say everyone's going to have something that they're passionate about, and I think that's a good thing. And so like I told you guys, like I'm an operationals guy. Like I love leadership development. I love operations. So those are the things that I focused on. And those are the things I get the most results for. And just trucking at it every day. And then you kind of look up and you're like, wow, we're not as bad as we were like a week ago. Okay, keep going. Oh, we're not as bad as we were a month ago. And then eventually the restaurant becomes more stable after that, about a year of just working and not getting any results that are very visible, I would say. The results happen slowly over time. Probably if I tracked it, to Giovanna's point, I would have seen them a little sooner than I actually did. But, I just turned around one day. I was like, wow, this is a lot better than we used to be.
Awesome. You mentioned earlier that about 90% of your job is communication. What would you say is the key difference between your mindset as that leader that was turning that 100% increase at dinner in Houston to now? Like, what would you say is the biggest difference in your mindset?
Yeah, I think is the more I can grow the people underneath me and the more people that want to work for me, essentially that just multiplies what I can do. And I don't mean like that lets me personally bread something faster. I mean, like, if I can teach my leaders through communication how to be better leaders, then they're just going to magnify the things that need to happen. And then not only that, they're going to take care of the things that maybe I'm not passionate about, and they're going to do a significantly better job. Or they're just going to be better than me in certain areas. I'm not great at marketing. I don't come up with great ideas. I have a girl who's awesome, is doing cow appreciation stuff, like doing a significantly better job than I could ever come up with. Now my job is still to be able to coach her through a lot of those things, but I don't actually have to be the one to come up with that.
Awesome. As you look ahead in your current position as an operator, if you don't mind speaking into this, like, what's next for you? You're still relatively young from what I know, right? And I think you plan on being in this seat of as an operator for a long time. What do you think is the next big opportunity for you?
Yeah, I mean, eventually, just with the way they build restaurants, multi-unit would likely be possible. I think that's one of those things where I believe in being ready for opportunities as they come up more than I get hyper fixated on a specific opportunity. So things just constantly change. And so, like, my goal right now is to have the strongest leadership team possible, and the best restaurant possible. And that will prepare me for multi-unit. And like, I'm removing things that I have to do. Like, I literally never do anything by myself, including leadership development stuff. Like, my director of ops is involved in all my leadership development because I believe that's a part of the way he learns, is by being near me and absorbing the stuff that I do, not me directly teaching him. So that being said, I am prepared for any opportunities that come more than I'm focused on one specific opportunity. I just want to be positioned to take advantage of anything that does happen to come my way.
Awesome. So multi-unit is in your future, and that's awesome, and we believe that you're going to make that happen. So now we're in the time where we're going to do Q&A. Ashley or Neff, would you guys? I think I saw some questions coming through the chat, but would you guys take it over from there in terms of facilitating those questions?
Yeah, so Eric, there's a question by Sean, says, do you know of any coaching opportunities for external candidates? So as you went through the journey, did you have any contact with any of these people or any coaches that would be suited for an external candidate?
Are they saying like they don't have Chick-fil-A experience?
If Sean is still on the line, would you be able to maybe give some more specifics on that? I'm assuming they are speaking in terms of somebody that does not have Chick-fil-A experience.
If they don't have Chick-fil-A experience, I mean, honestly, I think getting to know somebody inside Chick-fil-A is valuable, and then also spending some time in the restaurant. So I don't know about specific coaching for that necessarily, but if you're interested in LDP, I would encourage you to go volunteer a day at the restaurant to make sure it's your cup of tea, because the restaurant business definitely is not for everybody, and that's okay. I would hate to see someone go through a 6-month interview process, uproot their life only to find out they don't like working at a restaurant.
I think, Sean, you may have unmuted yourself and brought yourself back in. Would you like to speak into that question a little bit more directly?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time with operators in restaurants on a volunteer basis. Really, almost 3 years total in restaurant
Oh wow.
as I
Okay.
can. So I picked up a lot of experience with doing that. Work with operators in Louisville, Kentucky, and here in Dallas as well. I live in Dallas now. Started this journey when I was in Louisville, Kentucky, but I'm considered a complete external candidate. Got a full-time corporate job right now, but still spend as much time in the restaurants as I can. And I would
Yeah.
like to connect with maybe someone that's coach, like an LDP, person. I've talked to several people who actually went to LDP themselves, and I could tell that there's a vast difference from just, and I've had years of leadership, retail experience, military experience, but I still see that there's a big gap from someone who went to LDP as for someone that's external. And I was just hoping to maybe find a coach that could get me over the hump, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't know any specific coach just for that. I do know there's a few people who have been external who went to LDP. I think the biggest benefit as someone who went through LDP is learning the communication and just talking to so many different people. So I don't know a specific coach, but I encourage you to talk to like multiple operators, get to know them, get to know what they do, get to know how they speak as well. And so I think that's essentially the big difference is like you get asked on a daily basis when you're in LDP, like, what's your story? And so you get really good at sharing about yourself. It kind of goes back to that practice piece. I don't know if that helps, but I don't know a specific coach. Shameless plug for Alex, Giovanna, and Neff over here. They have a ton of Chick-fil-A experience, and I know they do coaching. And I think that's kind of the connection is like if you have that much experience, maybe your communication's great, but you kind of just need to know more of the ins and outs of Chick-fil-A.
And Sean, that's something that we can definitely help with. I know Giovanna, for a fact, is currently working with someone who is in the LDP process. And actually, we've all had, between the four of us, we've had people come out of our restaurant to become operators. They come out of our restaurants to go into LDP. So I think we have the knowledge to be able to help you with that. And we can talk a little bit more about that towards the back end of this conversation. If you just hang tight, Sean, we'll speak into something that maybe help you with that. I think there's another question from Mr. Davey, and I think you might have spoke a little bit on this, Eric, but just for the sake of the question, how do you find a track your growth? How do you know if you're growing?
I mean, one, I look at like, am I changing just in general? And so I track my growth through my restaurant. So if my restaurant's starting to like stall out, and those are different results, right? Like I use sales, I use CEMs, I use profitability, more IPO than profitability, but I feel like you're kind of splitting hairs. I use essentially like the team member engagement survey. This is like more unofficial, but like how many people are interested in leadership opportunities. And then one, like, I think it's important to know yourself and just like objectively, like, am I getting into a rut? Like, am I just doing the same exact thing every day? Because if I am, then I'm not growing. And so like there's certain times I just am like, hey, I feel like I'm doing the same things. And so like we're just literally going to change things up to try to improve somewhere. So I think that's a tough one. I think it just depends on what you want to grow in. So like right now, like we're focused on building leaders. And so like I have to become a better leader in order to do that. I have to release some control and let some of my other directors do more leadership development stuff. And so I think sometimes my growth is like less direct. I think the more you move up, it's like I have to do less, and that is growth for me, as weird as that sounds. But like I need my directors to do more, and that'll show me growing as a leader.
Also think,
go ahead, Giovanna.
Also think too, to answer that question for like yourself is, do you have a personal like growth plan? Everyone should have a personal growth plan. I mean, anybody you talk to in leadership development, we just went to a conference, a Houston conference, and number 3 on his list was, do you have a growth plan? Everyone should have a growth plan. So there's a lot of different ways that you can write a growth plan, or you can even have somebody do it for you. I help write leadership development plans for our leaders, but it really is just like specific to you, like where do you want to grow both personally and professionally? And you got to kind of ask yourself that question and then set up a growth plan to actually see growth happening.
Yeah. And like we do that very specifically with our leaders too, of like, I view it very simply, like, where do I want to be? Where am I currently at? What things need to change to get me there? And it's, if you look at it objectively like that, because what you're doing right now will get you to where you are right now. It won't get you further. And that's so like, you might have grown a ton. That's great. If you want to be an LDP, what are the things that you need to do to get in there? And then like, what is the gap? And then how do you do actionable things to get there? And if it's communication, go talk to people. If it's I don't have enough results to talk about, go get some results. Like if it's I know profit, but I don't know people, go figure out people, right? Like I think, and that's a harder one, but I would just encourage those.
Yeah, those three things. I think I said those earlier too, like in your restaurant growth. So like when you're talking about how are you measuring whether you're growing or not in your restaurant, it's where are we at? Where do we want to go? What do I need to do to get there? It's literally just outlining that for yourself, either for your restaurant, if that's what you're, like for top level leaders like Alex and I, operators like you, like that's what we look at every day is like, okay, are we where we want to be in the things that matter to us? Yes or no? Okay, no. Okay, where are we at? Where do we want to go? How are we going to get there? And you can even do that in your personal life. Of here's where I'm at financially, or here's where I'm at health wise, or here's where I'm at, intellectually. Here's where I want to be. Okay, what are the things I need to do to get there? If it's health, it's like, okay, well, do I need to work out? Do I need to change my diet? Like, it's just basic steps, but everyone needs a growth plan.
And I'll just to add to that, I would like to say, I think I totally agree with everything you're saying, Giovanna and Eric. But in addition to what you're doing to help yourself grow, I think it's important that you understand in your growth, you have to learn to serve other people. There's a line that Zig Ziglar uses. He said, if you help, the more people you help get to where they want to go, the more people that will pour into you. And so in your journey, as you're developing yourself, don't get so self-absorbed with where you're going that you forget about helping the other people that you're working with get to where they want to be as well. Because I guarantee you, if you have a spirit of service to those other individuals and they know what your goals are, they're going to go out there where to help you get better, give you more direct feedback, hold you more accountable to the things that you want to do if you are not just about yourself, but you're willing to help them as well. So I think that's an important piece. And then one other thing that I wanted to say before we wrap up is growing yourself is one thing, right? So you can read all the books, listen to all the podcasts, you can take all the courses, go to every conference. But if it doesn't translate into measurable and actionable things, I think, Eric, you said this, and Giovanna, you said this too. If it doesn't translate into driving results, you have to take a self-inventory of what you're taking in, and is it moving you to where you want to go. I heard something recently. A leader said, you have to learn to fish on the fish's terms, right? And so if you're doing things and implementing things that the people around you aren't looking for or aren't driving results, you have to continuously try to reinvent in yourself. How do you be more effective? How do you come across more effective? And so we're about 2 minutes out. I want to say, John, do you have something else? I'm sorry.
Well, and I think too, Eric, maybe you can answer this question a little bit better too for some people. But one of the things, like in a personal growth plan that you should have, is like surrounding yourself with people who are better than you. Like you always want to find those people out there, which there's tons of them. Like you always think I might be at the pinnacle. Oh, no, there's always somebody better. I'm not Michael Jordan. I never will be. If I want to play basketball though, I probably want to email Michael Jordan because I want to find out what he did to get where he was at. Right. And so for you, Eric, like as an operator, is there any operators out there, or even I would just say like people that were in LDP with you that you consistently connect with as a mentor to help push you to where you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's important to have mentors and then equals and then people like who are underneath you and you're developing. I think that just keeps you well-rounded. And so like I still keep up with my operator I used to work for. He's a mentor. Bryant Ford, who I mentioned before, like I still keep up with him. Like I just was in Atlanta a month ago and was catching up with him. I still view him as a mentor because he just has a lot of experience and is a very just wise person that I respect. And then there's other operators who are like, a little bit more, it's like that kind of competitiveness that like we kind of just like bounce off each other in a healthy way, which is great. And you're generally experiencing similar things and allows you to talk through them. And then I think, kind of giving back and building up people really helps you refine essentially a skill. If you can't teach a skill, you don't know it well enough, in my opinion. And so like, if I can't teach someone how to communicate, then I'm not a good communicator at that level and I need to improve. So I think it's important to have all facets of your life continuously there. And those people might change.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, I want to just, the time is now 8:00. I want to say thank you so much, Eric, for spending some time with us today. I feel like a lot of the people on the line were enlightened by your story. You gave us some real practical things that we can implement on our journey. And so if you want to stick around, Eric, we can kind of reconvene, or you can leave now if you like. We'll catch up. We got some catching up to do next week for sure. Does anybody have any closing words for Eric before he departs? No? Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. And we'll catch.
Tap into the Pivot Experience, where we help young, hungry entrepreneurs move on to the next step.